J. Mendelssohn, a name to conjure with. Some people called him Bill. Some called him Will. Others called him Uncle Willie. And in time, others called him Grandpa Willie. Some even called him Mr. Mendelssohn. I called him Daddy. To say that he was charismatic does not begin to talk about his magnetism. When he came into a room, the electricity seemed to sparkle. People sat up straighter, eyes became brighter. There was a sense of expectation, and he rarely disappointed. He came in, he would greet everybody, and then he would take over. He would tell stories of his exploits, adventures, and all of his stories had humor, some daring, some sense of obstacles that had to be overcome. And here he was at last, brought to this present moment. Daddy was, above all, a salesman, and I remember him as being a traveling salesman, an insurance salesman, and finally, a hearing aid salesman. And I remember how delighted he would be. He would tell me that when children came in and were fitted with hearing aids, and they heard sounds and voices clearly for the first time, they would get such a wonderful expression, and he was so thrilled that he could be part of that. I have been told that the first time we were in contact with one another was the day I was born. I was the oldest child, the first child, and he was so excited and so thrilled to have a child that he went to the office of the Daily Mirror, which was a New York tabloid. He knew a reporter there, and he said, "Do you know that today the most beautiful child that was ever born in the Brooklyn Jewish Hospital was delivered this morning?" It must have been a slow news day, because they send not only a reporter, but a photographer. And when they got to the hospital, knocked at my mother's door and came in and told them what they wanted, she said, "Are you crazy? Get out of here this minute." She had all the caveats and fears of all of the Jewish folklore. Never boast about your circumstance. Never let anybody know that you're enjoying yourself, because the fates would be there to take over. Men didn't seem to worry too much about this. They didn't realize that the fates were waiting in case they actually enjoyed life. They really did not want to be bothered with all of this mishigas nonsense. Well, the things that I remember from my own experience, and not things that I were told, begin several years later. My father took his role of paterfamilias very seriously, and he felt that in order to raise good children, you have to start very young. And he had 3 virtues that he tried to instill in us. And he said, if you do these, you will turn out to be good people. And the three things were as follows: do not lie, do not cheat, do not snitch. Well, we had many occasions to realize that if we did any of those things, there were repercussions. And one of the things that I remember best happened when I was in second grade, when I fibbed about a gold star on my homework. Our teacher was in the habit of collecting homework when she finished taking attendance in the morning, and during the day she would manage to go over the homework, and if it was correct, she would put a gold star on it. Well, I was a pretty conscientious and good student, so I very often did get a gold star. But on one occasion, there was an assembly called that had not been programmed beforehand, and so the teacher neglected to collect the homework. Later that day, my cousin, who was in my class, showed me a box of gold stars that she had bought from the local candy store. And she offered to let me have one. Well, I knew that my homework was perfect. So I took her up on her offer, and I took a gold star and put it on my homework. That evening, my dad asked me, "How was school today?" And I said, "Oh, it was fine." And I brought out my homework with the gold star. He was very pleased, and he told me how happy he was to see that I was doing well. After dinner that night, my cousin came over to play, and my dad said, "Well, Anita, how did you do on your homework today?" She said, "Oh, the teacher didn't collect it because we had an assembly." Dad looked at me very sternly and asked about what happened. I said, "Well, Dad, I know that my homework was perfect, so I did put a gold star on it myself." He said, "That is not acceptable. You told a lie." And so he took me to the laundry room, and there he washed my mouth out with brown Fels naphtha soap. And I can still see those brown bubbles floating in the air as it mixed with my saliva and tears and the soap. Lesson learned. It wasn't until I was a teenager that I realized that there should be and could be some kind of leeway to these basic rules. This happened when my aunt came to me with her new hat, and she said, "Well, Pearl, how do you like my new hat?" Well, I was old enough to realize that I might hurt her feelings if I told the truth. And on the other hand, I remembered my father's injunctions. So I hemmed and hawed, but she was very insistent. And I finally thought I got around it by saying, "Well, Aunt Gertie, I think some of your other hats are more attractive." Later that day, my mother came to me and said, "You know, Pearl, you really hurt Aunt Gertie's feelings." And I explained my dilemma and how I really tried, and I thought that I had evaded the question. She sat me down. She said, "Pearl, there are white lies and black lies. Not everything in this world is black or white. there are a lot of grays. And sometimes you have to tell a white lie in the name of tact so you don't hurt someone's feelings. Well, another lesson learned. It became obvious to me in time that Dad and Mom were really a great team. They loved each other very much, and they demonstrated it all the time. And they formed a union with each other so that they did not interrupt the discipline that the other one had planned. The problem is that sometimes one of them would think that the punishment was too severe, but they would not countermand the discipline until they conferred with one another. And they really did make a good team. Unfortunately, my mother died when she was 49 years old. We knew she was going in for surgery, but we had every reason to believe that she would come out of it. And so when we heard that she had died on the operating table, we were really shocked. And I realized then that Mother was the glue that held the family together. She was like the Greek goddess Hestia, the goddess of the hearth. She made our house a home. Dad was her counterpart, the god Hermes or Mercury, the fun guy. He was the one who used to take us to the zoo, to the circus, to all of these places. He would play baseball with us on the empty lot on the next street when springtime came. So he was really a lot of fun. But it was Mother who really made our house a home. In time, Dad, who was so devastated by Mother's death, was now living alone because by the time my mother died, my two brothers and I were married and having started our own families. My third brother was away at college. So Dad was now living alone in the apartment they had moved to after they sold the house that we had all grown up into that had really gotten too big for just the two of them. Dad was not really meant to be a one-some. And in time, his sisters and friends tried to set him up with eligible women. He resisted for a long time, but finally he felt, yeah, I think it's time for me to make some new friends. Eventually, he met a lovely woman named Louise, who was very different from my mother. She was a career woman. She had been married for a short time when she was very young, but most of her life was single. And after several months of courtship, they got married. I was so pleased to see Dad in a new relationship. And I think the thing that made it easy for me was the fact that Louise was so different from my mother. For a long time, they lived in the same area we did, and we saw them quite frequently. And then, after about 15 years, they both retired. And at that time, they moved to North Carolina, which was Louise's home state. And she had maintained a house there all of those years. And they had gone there for vacations from time to time. Once they moved there, I really didn't see Dad that often. I would see him when he came up for special occasions like weddings or bar mitzvahs, in my brother's families or mine. But we really didn't see each other too often. My youngest son did go down to North Carolina in the summer vacation for a couple of weeks, for a couple of summers. And he'd come back and regale us with Grandpa Willie's stories. It was nice to know that Dad had not lost his touch with storytelling. And then, when he was 76 years old, he wasn't feeling too well, and he was more comfortable with his New York doctors. So he came up to New York with Louise and went to see his doctor. And the news was not good. They told him that there really was not much they could do for him, and they really did not know how much time he had left. He sent Louise back to North Carolina to take care of some financial things, joint accounts that had to be changed, etc. And meanwhile, he stayed at my house. And by this time, he spent a great portion of the day in bed. But he still insisted on getting up to go to the bathroom. And during the day, it wasn't too bad because either my husband or I could help him. But I could not really get a good night's sleep because I was afraid that at night he did not want to disturb us, so he would get up and go to the bathroom himself, and I was afraid he'd fall and lie there until morning, and I really did not want that to happen. I finally called a friend of mine who was a registered nurse, and fortunately she was between jobs. She had just finished one case and had not begun another, and she agreed to come from 10 in the evening until 10 in the morning, which was wonderful. And it gave me the peace of mind to be able to sleep at night so I'd be ready for the day's work. And I did tell her, though, if there was any problem, don't hesitate to call me. The first night, everything went well. And the second night, at about 3 o'clock in the morning, there was a knock at the door, and Dorothy said, "You know, Pearl, I think you better come. He's breathing very heavily." So I went into the bedroom where my dad was, and I sat down on the chair next to his bed, and I took his hand in mine, and I started to recite the 13th Psalm. And I had gotten as far as, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," when I felt his hand being taken from my hand, and I knew that he was gone. The strange thing was that I had this very clear feeling that my mother had taken his soul hand and gone off with him, although I was still holding his hand. And I think that that helped me to get through the mourning process, knowing that he was in good hands.